Okay.
Welcome, creatures made of sound, evolving meat carcasses, and tourists from another universe trapped in a hallway, to episode 415 of an Unearthly podcast, streaming live on the 10th of August 2021, and featuring Big Finish's Scherzo, written by Robert Shearman, and starring Paul McGann as the Doctor, India Fisher as Charlotte Pollard, and featuring pretty much no other cast members. I am Bill Sylvia, the writer in black, and this audio drama gave me tinnitus. With me are Randy Ronson McCulloch
Ears won't stop ringing.
and Thomas Fireheart.
Interesting that the Doctor and Charlie would get stuck in a Kraftwerk CD.
Mad Matt has given us an update in that he is no longer hospitalized, but of course now he needs to recover from the hospital stay itself before he's up to hosting a podcast. So he is still out tonight and hopefully feeling much better than he's been the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, he needs to build his stamina back up. I know how that feels, considering, my trip to the
Yep.
hospital wasn't that long ago either, so.
I don't
And
think
I didn't have half the breathing problems he did,
Mhm.
so.
I don't think I've ever been stuck in a hospital room for longer than maybe 36 hours tops. But I imagine it's awful for your ability to do things like sit upright if you're there long enough.
Well, mind you, they give you one of those beds that have the back automatically comes up.
Right.
So you're sitting there with the controls, the TV control is right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's remarkably convenient for the lazy. I can tell you that. But at the same time, remarkably inconvenient.
Well, that. Mm-hmm.
Because at least in my case, you need to tell a nurse if you need to so much as take a pee. So.
Right. So it's sort of like how I think my legs and lungs both sort of atrophied from working at home over the winter and not needing to leave my apartment unless I needed to walk the 1,000 steps to do laundry, and
Well,
otherwise staying on the property, except to maybe the nth degree.
well, in Matt's case, he had COVID, so the COVID,
Right. Well, yeah,
sticks to your
that's
lungs,
a whole separate thing. He needs to, yeah, a whole separate issue as well.
so he's still, he's
Mhm.
still technically recovering from COVID. He's
Right.
just good enough along that they feel like they don't need to monitor it at the hospital.
Right.
But he's still with it. He's still having some breathing problems,
Yeah.
and that's making issues like getting up and going to the bathroom and going downstairs to the kitchen a bit of
But what
a
what
bit.
I was saying is the hospital stay does add an extra dimension. For example, even the ventilators. The reason they're so afraid to put people on ventilators is basically your lungs aren't stop being used to working for themselves. So once you get taken off, they don't know if you're going to be able to start breathing on your own again.
Yep. From what I heard, Matt came that close to being on a ventilator.
I don't know what the threshold is.
Because
Yeah.
they had him on one of the most industrial oxygen machines at one point,
Oh, I
and
see.
it was up to like 90% of capacity, and it was barely helping.
I remember when he checked in, he gave a really what at least would seem to me like a very low oxygen percentage. So
Yeah. I've had that low of an oxygen percentage because, mind you, my problem is my lungs don't get enough blood because my heart doesn't pump enough.
right.
Yay, heart. But Matt's was a completely different animal, and yeah, that's basically the way COVID kills people. It functionally chokes you to death.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm in this person now I gotta go choke a bitch.
Right.
Die! And so suddenly your lungs aren't getting enough air, you can't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And that slowly just shuts you down because your body doesn't get enough oxygen, and your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, and eventually your brain will stroke out and you die.
Yep.
But like I said, so they were having trouble getting Matt on on enough oxygen, but fortunately he did get better, and they were able to put him on lesser machines, and then move him upstairs, and then by that time he was just about ready to go home.
Right.
But now
Yeah. So I don't want to imply he's done with COVID, but he's better than he was when he checked in.
Yep.
In terms of the COVID part.
Correct. And let's hope he continues to get better, regains his stamina, and can join us next week.
Right.
Because, goddammit, I'm sick of having to click on everything for this podcast. That's why we have Matt. So how's everybody's week been?
Let's see. So this time last week, I was in the middle of a virtual conference, and I've got to say, that was a great way to kick off my fall semester. I forget if I mentioned on the podcast at all, but July did havoc for my circadian rhythm. It was the longest I had been without any sort of employment or schedule since I was since I was 16. Um, and I mean, I'm still technically employed in the sense that I have grad school, but from the last duties I had ended in June, and the next ones don't pick up till the end of August. So I was functionally an unemployed person throughout the month of July, and that meant that I pretty much had no. There was nothing to distinguish the difference between what 4 hours meant and what 4 days meant, day from night, up from down, left from right. But having a virtual conference to start off August meant that I was waking up at close to the same time every day, at least before 11 a.m. I had somewhere to travel to so that I would go to school and have a better internet connection than I have at home. And then I would return home at night and go to sleep, kind of mimicking what life was like before the pandemic. So it was a really great way to kick off my August, and I'm feeling a lot more energized than I was at any point in July.
I would just like to point out that you saying that, you've basically pointed out what the last 20 years of my life have been like.
You at least have a game to travel to,
Yeah.
which I did not in July.
Yeah, and I did work for those 3 months about, 4 years ago? But that never stopped our podcast, because that was a day job.
Mm-hmm.
I missed that job. That was nice. But I couldn't physically do it anymore, because heart. Yay,
But yeah,
heart!
during that time, you were really the only socialization I had, because even like my closest friend that's in Ohio, she was in Iowa with family first. Just going home to see her family, then having a funeral, and then going on a family vacation. So I really didn't have any interaction other than the podcast for at least a month.
Yeah, I have my gaming groups, and I would have gone barking mad by now if I didn't have my gaming groups. So, thank you, Bob and the others, and thank you, Matt, for running one on Saturdays that I'm not gaming. And actually, I've just gotten into a different group that I run Cyberpunk on for like the last 2-3 months. And they're strange people, but they're nice people, so.
Oh, and that reminds me, you probably don't see Facebook notifications if you don't check Facebook, right?
I don't check it often. I get some Facebook notifications.
Did you see the thing the post I tagged you in?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I should talk to you about that.
After the podcast, I take it?
Sure, yeah.
All right. All right. Anyone else have anything to say about this week?
Not really. It's basically been bog stand for me, just that I've been streaming still a bit more regularly and finally got 2 concurrent views. Which was nice. It was like, oh my god, 2 people active in chat. It's Christmas.
All right. I guess we're gonna move on then. That might be a short week tonight.
Might be.
All right. So on the podcast tonight, we have a couple of birthdays, some news, no deaths, fortunately. Little geek talk. Matt, while not being here in person, has given us a review of Shame for one of the audios that he's missed. And And then it looks like we're down to our episode summary, our review, our final thoughts, and our rating. Who has the summary tonight?
I do.
Okay. As long as you know when you're set up for it.
Yep.
All right, so let's move into birthdays, shall we? The first birthday is on the 8th of August and is writer Terry Nation, the man that created the Daleks. He would have been 91, but he died in 1970 or 1997. 1970. No, what am I thinking? 97 at the age of 66. The next is another posthumous birthday. It is on August 10th and is Kato Mara, who played the Ronnie in 85 and again in 87. She would have been 82, but she died a few years ago in 2014 at 74. I remember that.
Yeah.
So that's it for the birthdays. And I forgot to put up their pictures. Again, I'm trying to do 6 things at once. Here is Terry Nation, for those of you that don't know. And
I wonder if Terry Nation lived long enough for his fans to for the sort of fandom to come around of his fans calling themselves the Nation of Terry. Because I'm sure if he was alive now, that's exactly what would happen.
They probably would. I mean, he'd probably have a Facebook page by that name or something. But I doubt he quite made it that far. Although, I don't know. He might have had a newsletter. Who knows? But, yes, you can see him there surrounded by his creations. Although those look like a few of them look like they're custom models.
I saw a photo of him shared on Facebook. It might be the same one you're looking at. But he looked kind of more friendlier than I would have anticipated just based on all the various conflicts around his creations and how stark his writing tends to be.
Yeah, he apparently posed for a bunch of these pictures with the Daleks and some different expressions and stuff. And this is the one that had the most Daleks and was the proper ratio, so I took it.
Gotcha.
And here is Kato Mara. You will remember her as the Ronnie if you saw Mark of the Ronnie, Time in the Ronnie. And yeah, I remember we were hit pretty heavily on that because she had just signed up with Big Finish. Anyway, happy birthday to Terry and Kate. Moving on, we have only one piece of news, and that comes from Big Finish, speaking of them. And that is a new release, and that is The War Master Killing Time, with Derek Jacobi as the War Master, also with Alexandra Riley, with Katie Manning as Joe and Sarah Sutton as Nissa. So 2 companions.
I don't think I had realized that he made the jump from being a character in Time War Gallifrey stories to actually having his own range.
Yeah, this is like I think the 2nd or 3rd one now. So yeah,
I think he's even had one crossing over with David Tennant, or at least it's been announced.
Something like that, I think. But here he is with Joe and Nissa, so that's going to be interesting.
Of course, it's funny. The only reason I knew it was Terry Nation's birthday within the week between podcasts was because Big Finish are doing a sale at the moment on all Terry Nation related stuff. So basically, like Doctor Who stuff related to Monsters E.
And a frack ton of Blake 7, I bet.
Yeah.
Related to sales, the other sale that overlapped with that one, I finally gave in. All Gallifrey stories were half off of whatever the listed price was. I didn't buy any of the more expensive ones, but I did drop $25 on the first 3 series.
So we can look to probably reviewing that some point in the future.
Yep. I want to listen to the Time War stories, but everything with a Time War label on it right now is still the more expensive stuff on the site.
Well, yeah, that's because it's only a few years old. It's only the stuff
Yeah,
that's like 10 years or more that they mark down.
It's all post 2014 anyway.
Okay, so that is all of our news. We are making good time, ladies and gentlemen.
Mhm.
Um, moving on to to Geek Talk, television streaming,
Yep.
and you want to talk about The Flash.
Yes, so the Flash's latest season wrapped up either 1 or 2 months ago. Again, time. What is time? Wibbly wobbly. Um, and yes, the Flash's latest season. I feel like this was a very disorganized season. I mentioned at the end of season 6 that it seemed more like a season midpoint than a finale. They were kind of upgrading from one big bad to another. And I chalked that up at the time to the fact that most of the first half of the season was spent setting up for Crisis. So it was almost as if Crisis was the season finale, starting a new season afterward. However, that arc kind of ends a few episodes into season 7, which then starts a new arc, which I was familiar with some of the concepts from a pretty recent, uh, and by recent I mean past 10 years. I couldn't tell you exactly when, but a relatively recent arc of the Flash that had made headlines because it sort of changed how the DC universe works. Uh, I don't know whether or not I should give any more details with that, but if you know what I'm talking about with Forces of the Universe, you'll know some of what was introduced on there. Um, and then that arc ends, although it's kind of it ties into what follows, so I won't say that part was disorganized, but then there's another mini arc at the end which kind of is about basically finally dealing with another villain that had been introduced in a previous season before Crisis. Uh, so there's basically three small arcs in this season that don't have much to do with one another. They do kind of lead into one another, but it's not in the same way that I would consider them a consistent, and that I would think they should be part of the same season together. I think it would have definitely been better if they had wrapped up the arc with Mirror Monarch, um, and then at the start of a new season started the next arc. In addition to that, there's the fact that the cast is large enough that even though in every episode it seems like there's at least two people who are uh, unavailable for some reason. Either the actor doesn't even show up in the episode, or the character makes an excuse and can't be reached on their phone, or something. There's always at least two people who are unavailable, and yet it still feels like a crowded cast. So really, the amount of cast members they've accumulated over 7 seasons is really starting to weigh it down at this point. Um, Part of that is, and even this is kind of despite the fact that a major cast member doesn't even show up because he was fired after filming season 6. I think I mentioned that on the podcast as well. And his character makes a cameo as them basically saying, "Oh, you know, as you recall, he's the elongated man, so he's basically made of plastic." They mentioned basically something happened and he was effectively melted. And they basically try to heal him. So if he appears in season 8, they have an excuse of why his appearance is different. So even with Ralph not even being there, there's still too many cast members, too many plot points. And I remember before I started watching the season, a few stills from the finale uh, of three different people fighting. I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen those stills. One of whom, that's the only episode he appears in the entire season. Uh, and it kind of breaks the lore in some ways, just because not by contradicting anything, but by not really making any sense. Um, yeah, I'm gonna hold off on actually saying what it is, but I can show you people the stills after the podcast if you want to see it. Um, but yeah, all in all, this entire season, it feels like the show should have ended. Um, I almost think
It should have ended in Crisis.
if it there's a very it gives me the feeling like the show should have ended in Crisis, like they're not quite sure what they're doing. Um, it doesn't make me look forward to season 8. One of the best characters on the show officially leaves the cast during this season. and it's it just makes it feel like they don't know what they're doing anymore, and that it's staying on for the sake of staying on. I'll point out Arrow was the first show in the CW verse, and that ended at season 8. So Flash, I definitely think if it has a season 8, that should be its final season because it seems like it stayed past its welcome.
Yeah, I've always said that the magic number for a series is 7 seasons. Doctor Who being the exception,
Mhm.
because Doctor Who you can
But
literally
even
change the main
then,
actor, the entire cast.
the longest it's been the same show in Doctor Who has been 7 seasons, and you can even argue that wasn't the same show because it changed producers several times
Hmm.
during those 7 years.
Mm.
But so as some of the other ones I'm thinking of. But if you think about it, the next generation era of Star Trek until Enterprise used the magic 7 seasons formula, and usually it left on a high note. I'm not going to talk about Voyager, um, but Next Gen and Deep Space Nine both were completed and felt fulfilling. You watched them, you sat down, you're like, ah, that was nice, you know. Um, Buffy ran for what, six seasons? Was
uh,
it 6 or 7? Somewhere in there.
I think it was 7. I think it was yeah, I think they thought it might end at 5 or 6 and it ended up going yeah, there
And
it was 7.
that you watch the ending and you're like, okay, I'm cool.
Hmm.
So 7 seems to be a very nice number for a drama series
Hmm.
to end. There are sitcoms that have gone longer, and there are sitcoms that have gone on way too long. Hi, Simpsons. Um, but yeah,
And
about seven.
even my favorite sitcom, if you take out the season that was truncated by the writer's strike, there's only really 7 solid good seasons in there that people like. And then there's kind of the one that they kind of put on at the end basically to keep the actors working, that even the showrunner and the cast aren't really fans of.
Mm.
But on the same thing, you think of Smallville that ran for 10 seasons, and really those last few seasons really felt protracted and like you got the feeling that the show had outlived itself.
Mm. I mean, there's only so long you can show Clark Kent prior to
Hmm.
becoming Superman.
And they
At some
managed to
point,
do
it's
it
like,
for a
why the
decade.
hell doesn't he? Yeah, it's like why the hell has it taken this long? It's like the idea of well, no, I mean, like, yeah, it'd be like trying if Gotham had always been centered around Bruce Wayne as a kid. It's like,
Mm.
does anyone
And
really
even
give a shit about Bruce Wayne as a kid?
and I think Gotham could have ended about 2 seasons before it did, to be perfectly honest.
But,
Hmm.
if Flash had known, like, going into it, that this would be its last season and was able to write with that in mind, I bet this would have been a lot better season.
I agree.
And instead, we've got a weak season and not a lot of hope for next time. All right. So I think that says everything about that.
Yep.
Moving on, Thomas, you had something?
Yep. I finally, I mean, God knows, I can't even remember what the how long ago I started playing it, but I finally recently finished the main story, at least, of Yakuza 0. And going by the numbering, you can tell that it is a prequel to the Yakuza franchise. But still, like, you're still playing as the main character from the first 6 games. It's just, now he's 20 instead of, like, in the first game he's like late 30s. Um because this is set during the late 80s in Japan during the bubble economy. Um
When we thought
And
Japan
like,
would buy the U.S.
but yeah, it's interesting because I've only played um the remake of the first game, Yakuza Kiwami, and this, and I feel like I prefer this. I mean, it is so funny how the stories are so damn similar because it's a matter of he gets kicked out of the Yakuza, all this stuff happens, and then by the end of it, he's back in. It's very much that line from, like, I think it's The Godfather Part 3, where he's like, every time I think I'm out, like, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in, sort of
That's
a thing.
it's the problem with prequels that they're trying to introduce the introduction.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's funny because it's like he starts as, and then willingly leaves, and then by the end of it, he's back in, which isn't really much of a spoiler because that's basically the whole franchise, seemingly. At least it seems to be a running joke, I think, for someone uh, I've talked to about it who's played slightly more games in the franchise than me, and it's like, yeah, that seems to be a running theme, is that he continuously leaves and then rejoins the Yakuza. And it's funny because he's trying to be an honorable Yakuza when it's like, well, what does that mean? Because you're still technically a freaking criminal, but um, but yeah, like and it's also one of those things where I think I enjoy this game more than the remake of the first game because you also get to play as Goro Majima, who is purely a side character in the first game, and he's sort of a rival that keeps showing up, and you have to um defeat him a lot. Whereas in this, you actually get to play as him, and he's really fun to play as, and he has his own plot going on. Completely independent. Well, I say completely independent. There is overlap, um, but the two characters never meet, and that's actually something that bugs me. But yeah, because it's like, you know, oh, that's an interesting aspect to think that this might show how they first met. Nope. At least not really. I think someone pointed out to me that like a post credit scene involving them is like, nope, that's their first meeting, and I'm like, no. I I refuse to believe that that is how they first met because that is really crap. If that's supposed to be their first meeting. Yeah, it's also funny because in the I don't know if it's like the standard outside of this game, but in Kiwami 1, the idea is that you're essentially just normally earning experience points, which you use to upgrade the fighting styles that you have and can switch between. In this, because it's set in the bubble economy in the late 80s, everything is tied to money. So you have to spend money to like spend in-game money to upgrade your character. Um which is kind of annoying at first, but at this point in the late game, where I'm basically just trying to get all the completion points at this rate, because I finished the main story. I have like billions of yen, so it's like, oh, it's nothing at this point. In fact, I've run into that problem that you really do in the end game in a lot of games where you have more money than you actually need, than you'll ever need to actually spend in the game because it's like, well,
For a
I pretty much
Yakuza, that means you won, right? You won at being a Yakuza.
well, that's the funny thing. The main plot even kind of, well, not necessarily, well, bits of the main plot, but like there are some side things where you'll be spending money and it's like, wow, a Yakuza could only dream of that kind of money. Or like, the level of Yakuza you're playing as could only dream of being that rich. And then it's like, dude, you've got like the thing, the money counter up in the corner says you've got like 50 something billion yen. Like you're
Hmm.
set. Like I even think I joked when I was streaming it. It's like, dude, I could buy like 6 condos and it wouldn't mean shit. Like at
You
this
at
point.
that point you could buy your own island.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know yen.
well, yeah, billions of yen is still tens of millions of dollars.
Yep.
Yeah.
At this point, you could just buy an island full of naked women and retire there. The
Yeah.
dream that what's his name? What's his face had from Star Trek First Contact? Zephram Cochrane. That was his dream, was to retire to an island full of naked women. With that much money, you could actually do it.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, it's so funny because like some of the interactions would just be like, "Wow, I don't have that much money." It's like, dude, you would never make any more money in your life, and you would be set.
Hmm.
But it is funny because the later you get in the upgrade fighting style process, the higher the cost is, obviously. And it's funny because even though it gets to a point where you need to spend like 1 billion or like 1.5 billion to upgrade stuff, there is nowhere near enough stuff that I am going to drop under 1 billion at this point of the few things I have left to upgrade. And even then, that's just because it's locked behind something I need completion points to unlock. So it's funny. I will say one annoying thing that I ran into in the game, and this is purely something that I had to deal with that not many other people who stream would have to deal with because they wouldn't be streaming directly from their console, is I was trying to stream the end of the story, and uh I ran into the issue that happens a lot. Well, I say a lot, not too often these days, where the game is like, nope, you cannot stream this part the way you're streaming it. Um, so I had to like s- just stop the stream dead because I was like, oh, well, the game won't let me show the final chapter of the damn story. So, oh well. That was frustrating as hell. So now I'm like, well, I guess I've finally like the one upside to that was it was the final kick in the pants I needed to be like, okay, I need to just start saving up for a PC then. Because if I was streaming from a PC, this would not even be an issue because I've already got an HDMI splitter that would get around that. It's just that, my laptop could not handle streaming. So I would need to get a PC that's capable of it. But yeah, in any case, I'd say the game is worth checking out. And honestly, if you're new to the franchise, I feel like this would be the best starting point because the remakes of the first two games added stuff to reference this game. So the references will make more sense if you've played this first, whereas I
Hmm.
played the remake of the first game first and then this. So it was more like retroactively certain things were like, oh, okay, that got referenced later. And like some things in Zero are also probably like, oh, well, this was an element in the first game. Let's expand on that. Sort of random backstory sort of stuff late and like in this. But yeah, I'd say it's worth checking out, and it's probably the best. Um, Between this and the remake of the first game, I'd say this is a better entry point.
All right. Anything else to say?
Uh, no, that's about it.
All right. So that'll be it for our geek talk. Now, the next thing is up is our review of Shame. Matt, while he is unable to join us, is taking the time to watch all the backlogs of the audios, and his first one's ready to go. Bill, if you wouldn't
We
mind.
we also have a surprise entry. He got us another one in about 10 minutes ago, so I'll
Oh,
be able
god
to cover
damn
the
it.
first two of his reviews.
Well, you go.
Uh,
You go talk about the first one while I go search for the image for the second one.
okay. So Chimes of Midnight. Matt says what he liked was that it had a nice tight cast. Even though he wasn't feeling the best while listening, he was able to keep up with the small group and what the story was up to. What he did not like was the idea a time loop makes a house sentient. Interesting but very abstract idea. His favorite moment was Charlie uncovering the source of the time disturbance and being the focal point of stopping the time loop was interesting, as the audios have been hinting she was important time wise for some reason. And of course, gets resolved later. Least favorite moment, he couldn't think of anything really. His closest nitpick was making the butler the obvious voice for the bad thing happening. It's silly but harmless,
Okay.
which gives a total score of 4.
All right.
The original average was a 4.33. A 4 makes it a 4.25.
Okay.
So
You
pretty
already. You
close
already.
to the average.
You already added that then.
Yep.
Okay.
I figured you wouldn't be able to while also hosting, so
I've been able to make some adjustments here.
gotcha.
All right. So
No.
the next one is
Mhm.
Neverland.
Neverland, the general thing he liked, he said, was the story, as the long backdrop of time events tied to Charlie come to a head, and an anti time universe tied to other Gallifrey going ons. Finally, gives a bit more grounding for strange events, including this episode's own goings on. What he did not like were that there were times in the story where he just kind of faded out and lost track of what was going on. Thankfully, from what he can tell, he didn't lose track of much, just the loss of a background character or two. His favorite moment was the Doctor getting to explain himself to Rassilon and how he's been set on his current path. His least favorite moment, being a nitpick again, he says, this time it's that he doesn't like long cliffhangers, but setting up the Doctor as the next big bad is also equally interesting. The final score of 4.5. The original average was 3.83. A 4.5 brings it to 4.0. And I mentioned to him in our group chat that he is the only person in our panel to rate Neverland higher than Chimes of Midnight.
Ah, interesting. All right. So that's it. That's two down. Let's hope he
Yep,
can get it. He can get the other two in by next week. He should, because he's got a whole week to do it.
right.
And this time, hopefully, he can deliver them in person.
Hmm.
So that will take us from there to our topic of the evening, which is Big Finish Scherzo. And for the summary, it is you, Bill.
All right.
Give me a moment here to bring up El Stopwatch.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to put that on the screen, because why not? And, you ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1, go.
Following up off the cliffhanger of last week, Charlie finds the Doctor hiding in his TARDIS and seeming confused, maybe a little Zagreus-y, hard to tell. Darkness is spilling in through what should be the door to the TARDIS corridors, and Charlie convinces the Doctor to go through the outer doors into the light. They find themselves in a void of bright light with a constant buzzing sound and a wall. The Doctor is suffering from losing his time senses. And at first he seems to sulk, but he's then angry at Charlie for betraying him. He says basically for coming with him and for saying she loves him. If he was going to go into another universe where he expected to die, he wanted to die alone and for Charlie to still be alive. And now it seems that instead they're both going to die together. Over time, the doctor eventually reveals that they've been walking for days, so I guess he can still keep track of time.
Yeah, he
They
said that he could measure by the beat of his hearts.
which, yeah. Anyway, that's for the review time. Anyway, they encounter something mimicking their sounds of them, which it turns out to be a creature made of sound. Their senses seem to return, which causes Charlie to pick up all of the exhaustion she's picked up over a few days, kind of collapses in exhaustion and hunger, leading them to find a single cell organism large enough for them to get meat from, which the doctor cuts with a brooch that Charlie had with her, that he also uses to kind of examine the thing. This bit kind of repeats in a while. They lose all of their senses. They encounter the sound creature. They get their senses back, and then they find the creature to eat. And it seems to be evolving each time that they encounter it. They also notice that their hands are starting to fuse as if they're becoming one organism. In order to break the cycle, the doctor decides to cut his throat and to give the sound creature access to his vocal cords. At the next feeding, they realize the sound creature seems to have evolved into a clone of Charlie, or close enough that she can recognize herself in it, leading them to refuse to eat the creature. This somehow kicks off the next stage of evolution in both themselves and the creature. They realize they're turning to stone because Darwin or something like that. And having already strangely recited marital vows, they decide that kissing will cause them to merge into a more evolved being, a beast with two backs, if you will. Charlie seems to have a hallucination in which the doctor thinks he's her
Oh, good
daughter,
Lord, Bill.
but she manages to defeat the hallucination because the being pretending to be the doctor doesn't know what a brooch is for, which causes her to kind of reassert herself not as just a vague mother figure, but as Charlotte Pollard, an actual person. The doctor then has a hallucination with a being pretending to be Charlie, which he comes to realize is the sound creature itself. The sound creature essentially views itself as being their child, and in order to go on and explore the universe itself, it needs them to essentially die and let it take their place. The doctor has been going through his whole sort of bits of confusion and existential crisis throughout the entire thing. But the doctor refuses to sacrifice Charlie, and Charlie refuses to sacrifice the doctor. So their refusal to sacrifice one another basically causes a sound creature to die instead. They manage to split back into separate beings and to go into the TARDIS. The end.
Right, you did that in 4 minutes, 14 seconds.
I think that
And
was my longest scripted summary, but then again, I didn't script the last bit.
yeah, and oh God, that beast with two backs pun. Oh,
I mean, the whole, like, as I was listening to it, I was like, "What's with all the marital metaphors here?" So I had to make a comment because I was like, "Really?"
oh, that hurt. I am not gonna lie, that hurt. Alrighty.
If you're listening and you don't know what that's a metaphor for, ask your parents.
All right. Let's talk about what we liked about this episode. Bill, you are first.
So I liked how they've addressed how alien the new world is. Um, it's weird, and I mean, I wish more Doctor Who stories address the fact that one planet is not necessarily like another planet. Although I guess we can kind of blame Rassilon for that. Uh,
Hmm.
However, this really shows they're like, we don't know what this environment is like. We don't even know if they have the same sort of atoms and gases and, senses and the ability to breathe and eat. So I like the way they addressed that.
Well, usually in a Doctor Who episode, they have the TARDIS take a reading, but
Mm.
check the
They all,
radiation meter, check the oxygen
and I
levels.
guess they usually they manage to always land on M class planets.
Either that or they never show us when they don't.
Hmm.
But regardless, um, yeah, it did make an interesting concept. Thomas?
Um, you know, say what you will about the execution, I at least give them credit for trying something this experimental. Like, I would rather have more stuff occasionally like this where they're at least trying something different, even if it fails, than just going, fuck it, bog standard for like forever. So I have to give them at least a bit of credit for trying that. I mean, you know, I'll go into that in a bit more detail later because there are comparisons I can make of different things that this sort of evokes in my head. But yeah.
Alright. So, what I like is that this is a concept that that couldn't really have been done properly on television. This is like,
Mm.
yeah, we're making an audio adventure. Let's make use of that by making them blind, functionally blind, so that they can't see anything, and therefore all that they really know is what we're hearing.
Mm.
Mm.
Like Thomas said, that's great as a concept.
Right.
I don't know if their
Mm.
execution was quite as good as it should have been, but it was a great
Yeah.
concept.
It would be interesting listening to Embrace the Darkness, which we have not covered on the podcast, and I know Thomas has not listened to it. Randy might remember it. But
I
listening to Embrace the Darkness and this back to back, I'm curious how they would compare.
I don't remember it if I listened to it.
Mm.
Anyway, let's move on to what we didn't like. Bill.
Oh, so that's me again. So I had a world issue, but I think I'm actually going to go with what I think is more strongly affects the story negatively. Uh, which is a character drama issue, and that is that Charlie is really dense here. She doesn't understand that the doctor wanted her to not die, and that her saying she loves him just makes the pain of the fact that she's followed him to her death that much worse. And no matter how many parts of that concept he explains to her, she's never able to take that one step further and see the connection between things. She's just dead set on one idea, almost flanderized here. And it gets kind of annoying after a while.
All right, I can see that. I'll be talking about the other end of the coin equation of that unless Thomas gets to it first. Thomas.
um. Yeah, like I originally had something else that I was gonna bring up, but this to me, despite the fact that this was written and done prior to New Who, I can see this being a Rose 10th Doctor fanfic.
This is almost the pro. I was thinking this in the kitchen while I was
Mm.
listening. I was cooking while I was listening, so it was like, and I'm listening to that part of it, going, "Oh my God, this is basically proto Rose at this point."
Mm.
Yeah. It's just like, oh god. Like, you could almost, to a point in Zagreus, have thought the I love you thing was more maybe if you really wanted to stretch it. But now it's like, oh no, we're going there.
It's interesting in
Um,
that so much of like the intonation, like the way they deliver the lines, you can be like, okay, they love each other in the same way I love my close friends or that I love my sister. But this is so rife with marriage metaphors and sex metaphors
mm,
that it's really you really have to bury your head in the sand to be like, oh no, they're saying that they're close friends.
mm. And like them becoming, you know, becoming one being and all that and whatever. And it's
Mhm.
like, and the funny thing is, it's a bad sign when that was reminding me of a absolutely terrible uh The Thing comic that I remember Linkara covering at some point, where they basically turned the Thing into this weird fucking monster romance shit, and it's like, what the fuck? Like when when your story is evoking that in my mind, that's a bad sign.
All right.
Uh,
So Bill covered one end of it. Thomas covered a middle ground. I would like to cover the other half of the coin here and mention the fact that while yes, Charlie basically spent the entire bit like a needy bitch, the doctor was a complete asshole at the same time.
yeah.
More than the doctor
Mhm.
usually is. And I
Mm,
can understand some of it, but it
Mhm.
went on a little too long and
I
too far.
Mhm.
yeah.
And as I was listening, I was like, I can imagine a lot of people, part of the reason they dislike this story is because of that. And I'm like, and it definitely it doesn't make the story more fun to listen to. I also think,
Mm,
especially looking back on it, post RTD, post Moffat, it's really in character for the Doctor to get sulky and like bitchy at a time like this. Like that's really what he does. So that's not out of character, but it also does not make it a more fun story to
It,
listen
it,
to by any means.
but it's not really in character for this version of the Doctor. I mean, if you
mm,
watch the other like eighth or listen to the other Eighth Doctor audios, he gets snide and sarcastic, but he doesn't
mm,
really get cold
Mm-hmm.
and mean.
yeah.
So the fact that he's almost deliberately cold and mean,
Right.
Mm,
and he keeps it up for like 3/4 of the audio.
That's right. I was partially attributing that to he's still in that same like fucked up headspace from Zagreus as well. But I don't know how far that goes, and that's definitely like you don't have to accept that as being acceptable either.
I mean, I
yeah.
would expect that for maybe the first episode and a half.
Mm.
But
Mm,
then the doctor usually gets it up, you know, snaps out of it, and becomes a little more empathetic.
yeah.
And I was waiting for that to happen, and it never really did. And I don't know, it just bothers me.
Mm.
Mm.
All right, so let's talk about our favorite scenes. And Bill, again, you're first.
Yes. Um, favorite scenes. I had definitely gone through the thinking of this, but between Geek Talk and the summary, I think that kind of somewhat slipped my mind. So I'm just kind of going through the scenes in my head. Um, it might be easier if Thomas goes first while I'm thinking.
Do you have one, Thomas?
uh, um, hmm. Honestly, it's funny because, like, by virtue of it being audio, it's more purely lines than anything. But I guess the bit, like, right at the start with Charlie not being able to find the doctor, and it turns out he's just hiding under the console. He's like, "Quick, come down here and hide with me." So, like, that got a bit of that got a bit of a chuckle out of me. There's probably something else that happened later,
All right.
but yeah.
So Thomas had his. Come on, Bill.
I I think I'm going to go with this is related to what I liked already, but I think I'm going to go with the scene of the doctor talking about how, you know, we can't take anything for granted. There might not be oxygen in this universe. You know, we're very likely, or we're definitely going to die here. uh, saying in that universe, not necessarily in that spot. But the way he goes about it all, I mean, it's part of the mean spirited assness as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not entirely that. It's also him,
Mm.
really giving information that Charlie had clearly not thought through that she needed to understand. Um, so yeah, I'd say that scene would probably be my favorite there.
All right. I think my favorite scene is the one with the sound creature and Charlie. The whole "but you're my mummy" and "you'll do anything for me," and then at the end of it, it's
Mm.
"no, give me my brooch back and go. I'm not your mother, and go to your room." You know.
Yes, yeah. That's very interesting, surreal scene. If you that
Yeah.
one that
Especially with Paul
springs on
McGann
you.
being the sound creature at that point
Yes,
and going, "But I'm your
Yeah.
daughter." You want to
like,
bet he was just having the greatest fun with that in the sound booth,
like
just
Mm.
smirking his ass off.
I, I I was born a son, and then you pushed me back in and said, "Don't come back out until I'm a daughter."
I wonder how many times it took them to make that to take that scene.
Hmm.
Okay, least favorite scene.
Least favorite scene. I am going to go with the whole turning to stone. We need to kiss each other scene because
Damn it!
it's
Damn it! Damn it!
it's
Mm.
just like the explanation of Darwin there makes absolutely no sense. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Again, I've already mentioned the marriage and sex metaphors are ridiculous and over the top, and even just what the fuck is causing her to turn to stone? I still don't have an answer. I've listened to this twice now. No clue. It explains nothing.
Mm.
Yeah, that whole scene is just
The
really
the only
awkward.
positive about it is that it transitions into the final act where we're no longer dealing with them talking and walking in a circle. But the benefit of that doesn't start until the following scene, which was, the one you just like.
So, by the way, as an aside, because we have plenty of time,
Hmm.
they talk about how they're walking around in a big freaking circle, in a glass circle, and they can't see because the light is so bright. All I could think about is that they were walking in one of those ceiling fluorescent bulbs.
Yeah, because it was basically described it as like a torus made of glass. So that makes perfect sense.
And it's so bright because, hey, look, everything's fluorescent. Of course, that wouldn't explain why they're breathing oxygen, but still.
Right.
That's the only thing that was mentally in my head. And I had one of those, like, Men in Black moment where you just see them walking and it just kind of, pans out. And they're
Mm.
just in somebody's kitchen. In the bulb in somebody's kitchen.
uh, I mean, I feel like at one point the imagery of them just on a hamster wheel came into my mind. Uh,
Alright, so what's your least favorite scene, Thomas?
um. Uh. I mean, it'd be easy enough to go with pretty much any discussion of Charlie being like, "Oh no, but I love you." But I'm probably gonna go with, I forget if it's the episode, like the part one or part two ending, but like the bit where they kill like, big quotation marks, kill or whatever. They just like slice up that thing to eat it, and we basically just end with um Charlie starting to eat it, and the doctor being like, "That's yep, that's good. Just keep eating," and like that's it. It just ends. It's like
I think that's part one.
that's the
It's
yeah.
part
It's
two.
just like
That's part. Okay.
yeah. It's like that's the cliffhanger. Okay.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because they
Brilliant.
don't even meet the sound creature until part two, right?
Yep.
Hmm. So yeah, it's just sort of like, well, that was a weird moment to have a cliffhanger, but okay.
Especially after the last three Eighth Doctor stories we've reviewed, being longer than average episodes, and then this one they're back to 20-minute episodes, 24-minute episodes, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, they went back on that track, and they looked like they were just like, okay, that's the time to cut it. Cut it. Yeah. So my least favorite scene, it just because of the way they described it, was when they basically had Charlie slice the doctor's throat. And I'm just like, I don't know. At that point, I think that was just one point of surreal too many for me.
Hmm.
Because they're already letting this thing nibble on them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which, is not something that you instinctively let things do. And it's just
Hmm.
like, what the hell? And now it's like, oh, wait, I've got it. Charlie, take the brooch. Cut my throat. I'm like,
What bothered me is they describe it as basically like his throat is flapping in the non-existent wind, but there's no blood. So it's like, is this all a simulation? Like, I don't
it was just, yeah, I'm just like, I don't, at that point, I think my brain's like, I'm done. I'm done. Check, please. And then they get into the sex metaphor, and I'm just like, yeah.
So we've made it through all of our least favorite scenes without any of us talking about the story they told at the beginning of every episode.
Oh,
Any,
about the king and the
yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody have any thoughts on that? I would have thought it was just padding, except they reference it within the story.
Yeah, that's just so weird in that it goes like nowhere. Like it has nothing to like it
You're right
seems
there.
like it almost it's just probably just a matter of not hydrated enough or something. It seems to happen when I talk too much, I'm noticing. Um but yeah, that whole thing was like, okay, so is this gonna pay off in a way that we know, or is this just like an explanation for what this sound creature
Right.
is? Like,
And it, and I thought maybe like the one in part four would in some way like could tie into things, and then it takes a completely left turn, and it's like, other than the fact that they both involve like evil sound, they're really not related at all.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's just I just took it for granted, and I don't even think I heard the third part. I think my brain just tuned it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's like if Zagreus had never paid off to anything, to like the references they
Oh.
make to that in Neverland, and if that had
Mhm.
never actually paid off to anything.
For a second, when you said it's like, I thought you were going to say it's like the Last Chance Saloon, except it's not as repetitive. But that's what it reminded me
Yeah,
of.
that's because it only was at the beginning of the episode. If it was the
Mhm.
Lance Chance Saloon, it'd be at the beginning, the middle, halfway to the end. You get to hear it 3, 4 times an episode for 6 episodes. fucking hate that song. And oh my god, we brought it up, and Thomas hasn't gone on a rampage.
I think I'm far enough removed from it now that it's like, eh.
If we started singing, well, if I started singing it, I think you would both find your way to Ohio to kick me into.
uh,
So final thoughts then. Yeah, this story was really interesting in portraying an alien universe. But in some ways, it did that in ways that just didn't make sense. Because part of the things that were alien were human and Gallifreyan biology, which are things that, should have carried over and been consistent. Um, and I guess the laws of entropy could change from universe to universe. Um, but all in all, the best explanation I have for this is that the whole thing is a simulation in the Doctor's mind. Um, the Doctor loses his ability to track time, and yet he immediately recovers and comes up with a new way to track time, which it seems out of proportion with how much the loss of his ability to track time was bothering him in the first place. It doesn't seem like something you would recover from that quickly or that rationally. Um, and meanwhile, yeah, we have come up with a whole lot of issues with the drama of the storytelling, uh, and other things in addition to those little plot and world building issues. So, uh, at first, I was struggling to rate this at all, so I was thinking of it would be very middle of the road. But the more we've talked about it, the more I'm thinking that should be a little lower than that. And that's it for me.
All right, Thomas.
Yeah, for me, this is funny because this is kind of the opposite of last week. Where last week we were struggling for negatives to find, and this I was struggling for positives. Outside of yes, gold star, you tried. But yeah, like this, the things that I compared this to in my head, as far as what experimental-ish stuff in one case, and a lot more experimental seeming, at least anyway, in another. And at least as far as it being the most unique thing Doctor Who's ever done, is this felt like this was trying to be something in the vein of either Edge of Destruction or Kinder. And it failed miserably. By comparison, because Kinder is one of the best things Doctor Who's ever done in my mind. And Edge of Destruction I remember actually really enjoying, but only really because that was a two-parter. I feel like if Edge of Destruction... This is like if Edge of Destruction had been a four-parter instead of just two. Edge of Destruction sustained itself for 2 episodes because it's just the TARDIS crew in the TARDIS, that's it.
And with that, there was at least 4 different people to bounce the plot off of.
Yeah. And, that was just, 4 different people going insane. This is like, the concept is interesting, but the execution is poor. It's just like, oh god, they're stuck in this place for what? Basically a season's worth of stories, sort of ish. Or something like a decent number of stories anyway. They're stuck in this place, and it's like, well, I hope they're all not like this. I mean, I don't think so. I feel like I've seen the list I saw had more either characters or
They pick up a new companion in the next episode, or the next story.
So yeah, it's like, okay, thankfully it's seemingly not going to be like that the whole way through.
So this was number, I think. Oh, actually, I can check. This was number 52. Their next story with the Doctor and Charlie in the regular universe is 72. And of course, they're alternating between Doctors. I don't know
Yeah,
how
yeah.
many in a row are the Eighth Doctor.
There's like 8, I think, that take place in this universe.
Hmm.
Oh, it makes
Um,
sense because they went almost 20 stories without any Eighth Doctor, so they kind of put a bunch of him in the 50s and 60s.
hmm. Um, but yeah, it really is one of those things where, like, I feel like the Edge of Destruction was an interesting thing. It was interesting concept, like the execution. Kinder, interesting concept, love the execution. This interesting concept, eh, just a wet fart of a friggin' execution. And again, it really felt like someone had time traveled and stolen someone's like Dr. Rose fan fiction and just repurposed it slightly to be about Charlie
Either
and
that
the
or
Eighth
this is
Doctor
where
instead.
Doctor this is where the Dr. Rose thing actually started. This was the
Yeah.
progenitor. This is what gave birth to it.
Mm.
God damn you, Russell, for being a big Finnish fan.
Yeah, it was like it did get to the point where I was legitimately picturing Rose and 10 in some of these scenes, and I'm just like, I'd rather not be reminded of that. Thank you very much.
I can mentally see it. I can mentally see it, and I don't want to.
Yeah. Uh, God, and of course, like when they merged into one person, I was almost jokingly thinking, God, it'd be funny if it ended up just being some Cronenberg monstrosity.
I mean,
Well,
it
well, you did
might
it,
be
Charlie. You Cronenberg the world.
it might be because everything else seems to happen in their heads, so we really don't know
Yeah.
what they look like on the outside.
But
And
now,
like one version of the sound monster is supposed to look like an amalgamation of all of the Doctor's companions somehow.
I'm sorry. My brain is just taking what Bill said in his freaking summary and going and running sideways with it in wrong ways. I could see that scene gone completely different with the Doctor going they're doing the merging thing, and the Doctor just goes, I'm sorry, Charlie, I just can't. And Charlie's like, has this happened to you before? So wrong.
uh yeah, this I don't say this very often, but this is definitely one you could basically just skip. I mean, this is also one I will say, and it partly ties into the least favorite scene I had, where this feels like this would honestly have been better with less. Whereas like Neverland needed more cuts and parts, this felt like this could have been just like a two-parter and it would have been fine. Or at least the pacing probably would have made a bit more sense if this was just a two-parter and was shorter.
All right. Anything
Um,
else?
uh, that's about it.
All right. So my thoughts. Yes, the concept was interesting on paper, but whoever they got to actually write the script, I don't know what they were smoking, and I don't want any of it.
It was written by Robert Shearman.
Hmm.
I don't know. Was he in his high period? Because yeah, this is like it was written on a bad acid trip.
Let's see. He's written.
I
He
mean,
was
he did Chimes of
the
Midnight,
same
didn't
writer
he?
as Chimes of Midnight and
Yeah.
Jubilee, and of course, uh, I'm pretty sure he eventually adapted Jubilee into Dalek.
So
Yeah.
this was the script that he went mad in. Because I can't think of anything else. Because this is nonsensical.
Hmm.
This is like
That
what
might
the
have been what they commissioned him for. They're like, we're going into a new universe where nothing makes sense.
And
Mm.
he's like, okay, nothing makes sense. Let's have the Doctor and Charlie have metaphorical sex. Okay, we'll do that. And I can see probably it was the staff that had the concept of doing the whole they're in a void they can't see or anything, just to bring out the drama of this new to draw out the drama of what this new universe is like. And he just
Mm.
took that and ran with it and went weird with it.
Funny
I
thing
think
is, I'm just noticing of the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that he did. Robert Sherman did. Scherzo is the last one he did for like 4 years.
Well, yeah, he was in the asylum after this. They had to frickin' pack him off to the sanitarium, where he got much better eventually.
and he wrote the only two Doctor Who audio dramas apparently to include Frobisher as a companion.
Well, Frobisher would do this to anybody, so yeah. But I'm just saying that just seems to be the case. But no, that was written poorly. It was edited poorly. The actors did great with what they had, and obviously they had a blast with some of it. But the rest of it is just, ugh. I really dislike this one. Um, just because they felt out of character. Um, and they were written so they were out of character. And just everything about this bothers me. All right, let's rate this lemon. Speaking of that, could Big Finish return this under lemon laws, please? Oh wait, I forget they're British, so they don't get those.
I think I'm going to go with the 2.0.
Ooh,
It's really the acting and the strangeness of the universe are really the only solid positives I can give it.
okay. So 2 from Bill. Thomas.
uh yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with Bill on this one. I cannot. I was almost wondering, like, could I be nice and give it like a 2.5, maybe? It's like, no. As interesting as the
No.
concept is, all there really is the acting, and that's it.
Also, the fact that I needed an ear cleanser in order to get the buzzing out of my ears
Oh God.
definitely does not help the rating at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My ears were ringing when we started the call. I had to look up Final Fantasy music to stop it.
The buzzing, the occasional loud, obnoxious sound effect the sound creature would make,
Mm.
the sex metaphors, the out of character. I'm actually with you guys. I'm actually gonna go 1.5. I honestly do not like this. Do not like. So that is going to give it a 1.83, which is going to make it one of our basement dwellers. It is way down there in the basement with it is number 385 out of 398. This is now the lowest rated Big Finish we have.
Wow.
The next highest is Destiny of the Doctor Trouble in Paradise at a 2.33. So there you have it. I don't think I need to say anymore. 385. It is, by the way, the snowmen. You remember that Christmas special? The one with the
Yep.
horrible CGI snowmen? Was given a 1.8. And that had 2 zeros in the cast. Just to let you know how bad it is, Kill the Moon, which we all despised, was a 1.9. That's what this is in between. And that is all we're going to say for Big Finish Scherzo.
So, based on this story's reputation, I don't think we'll get many comments disagreeing with us. Let us know your least favorite part of the episode in the comments, or if you're one of the, if you're a dissenter and you actually like this story, let us know why in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and ring the bell to get our exports every Monday, or follow us on Twitch to get our streams every Tuesday night.
All right, so next time, we're done with Big Finish for a while, so we're going to move on to a little more familiar and less experimental territory. It's time to rejoin Sarah Jane with Sarah Jane Adventures, The Temptation of Sarah Jane Smith. Written by Gareth Roberts and starring Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith, Tommy Knight as Luke Smith, Daniel Anthony as Clyde Langer, Anjali Mohindra as Ronnie Chandra, and Alexander Armstrong as the voice of Mr. Smith. See you next week.